I'm especially concerned about the erosion of trust.
The idea that we've lost a collective truth.
I'm most concerned about a lack of hope.
The fact that we just don't talk to each other like we used to.
I see political polarization as the biggest threat facing my generation.
We have neglected to do the things that are necessary to serve the good people. I think the most important thing that we could be doing right now to bridge gaps and bridge understanding is to focus on the issues that matter to the people. As somebody who handles policymaking, I think when you focus on the issues that people really care about, people really notice that you want to make a difference. That's what we've done here in Pennsylvania. We focused on mental health, we focused on education, we focused on healthcare, issues that really drive at the heart of what people are focused on.
To me, it's really important to approach conversations with humility. I mean, none of us has all the right answers. No one of us is perfect. And so I think when I remember that there's something that can be gained and learned from every person that I'm in conversation with, it helps me to be in dialogue with people who have vastly different views than my own.
What do our country and communities need most right now? I think God and each other. We've become so isolated in our communities, in our individual lives because of any number of different things that are pulling us apart from each other and pulling us away from sources that contribute towards hope.
I think we need serious thinkers. I think in politics these days we elevate the bombastic, we elevate the ridiculous, we elevate the extreme, instead of elevating the people who are thoughtful and meticulous in their thought.
I think what we're going to need after this election cycle is the same after previous election cycles, right? Is a sense of common purpose and identity. And sometimes that's driven by outside forces, whether it's a natural disaster, a foreign event. But I think there's just key moments we have where we're reminded what it means to be American and that we have a lot in common.
I hope that after the election, we can start focusing on solving problems, not on who is the winner and who is the loser.
The last 4 years, we've still been talking about the 2020 election. We've still been talking about disagreements of old, and we haven't been talking about how to move forward as a country and solutions for the new challenges that face us. So I just hope that after the election, we put it behind us. Whoever wins, we move forward.
Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there's a field. I'll meet you there. Words from Rumi's work, The Great Wagon. Let's imagine that Rumi's field is this room, and on Zoom where many of our friends are right now. Thank you for meeting us here for the Civil Society Fellowship's third town hall on hopes, fears, and dreams in a divided America. A tradition begun in 2020, continued in 2022, and here we are right now again in 2024. Brought to you by the Civil Society Fellowship, now 5 years old. I'm Nike Irvin, the Managing Director of the Civil Society Fellowship, a program proudly of the Aspen Institute, where today's town hall is taking place. The Civil Society Fellowship's mission is to build civil discourse across differences, ideological, geographical, religious, racial, gender, life experience, practically any difference you might measure, we seek to include in our fellowship. It's 1 week before Election Day, a precious time in our democracy. It's also a fraught time that brings out some of our deepest divides as Americans. But today, we are here to experience a different kind of discourse around some of our great issues heading into November 5th, because we believe civil discourse is still possible in our current polarized context. And it is on each of us to show what that looks like. Our civil society fellows in the room come from across the political continuum, right of center, left of center, center of center, all ready to respond to questions that get to the core of their values. This is not a debate, but a time to hear from folks who, despite holding many differences, have chosen to come together and build relationships with one another, modeling a community where we can embrace and even learn to hear and respect the other. A countercultural act. Amidst the dominant narrative of divisiveness we see in the headlines every day, we hope that by engaging in this dialogue, everyone here today and watching online can walk away with a greater capacity to reach out and connect over difference wherever you are. Because no matter the election results, no matter, we know that we have the capacity to hear those differences. And this is one of the greatest ways to support a healthy democracy for our country. Now, today we'll go quickly. We'll not have time to solve all of the issues that we tee up. And in the interest of time, we're going to focus our conversation just on domestic issues. Although our fellows could tell you a little bit about Amsterdam and The Hague, Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and Haifa. Today's town hall will be navigated by three phenomenal fellows. Jennifer Sarver and Isaiah Oliver will guide the in-person chat conversation today, and Joe Jensen will guide the online chat. Between the three of them, we have leaders who self-identify as Republican, Democrat, and Libertarian. Before I hand it off to Jen and Isaiah, a quick word of thanks to Aspen leadership for being here in person. Maria Laura Acebal, is Maria here? Okay, all right, on our way. I see Alexis Edinger and Jim Pickup here from Aspen. We're so grateful to have you here. Tommy Loper, grateful to have you here, who's traveled with us on seminar. And a very, very special thanks to the McNulty Foundation. Johnny McNulty, happy to have you here from Brooklyn. Grateful. And with that, over to you, Jen and Isaiah.
Good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Sarver, and I'm from Austin, Texas.
My name is Isaiah Oliver, and I'm from Jacksonville, Florida, by way of Flint, Michigan.
By way of Flint, Michigan. You took
Yes.
a U-turn there, buddy.
Yeah.
We're really excited to lead this conversation with you all today, but wanted to start with a little exercise. Texan, Longhorn, Christian, conservative, Republican, blonde. Those are labels that I've given myself, that other people have given me. What about you?
Michigander, Floridian, dad, black dad, disruptor, husband, Democrat. Is that good? Is that good?
I think that's good. We wanted to talk about labels because we often find that we put ourselves in separate corners, in different boxes, on different sides of the aisle, based on labels that we've been given ourselves, that have been placed upon us, sometimes unwillingly. But what really matters is when I was in Ann Arbor visiting a friend a couple of years ago who was suffering from cancer, Isaiah drove an hour to have a beer with me. And we do that even though our labels might seem very different. And if you lined us up on paper, you wouldn't see us having community with one another. But we know that once you put all those labels aside and you look inside the humanity of each one of us, we find that we have much more in common. You can only do that when you're in relationship and fellowship with people. So what we want to model today for people in this room and people online is what it's like to be in fellowship. We recognize this is an unusual experiment of those of us who've been in a fellowship setting to be kind of pushed together with people who are very different than you. But what if more Americans were curious to learn about other people's perspectives, walks of life, and beliefs? What if we set aside those labels and invited conversation. That's what we want to do today. As Nikki mentioned, we're going to be having a conversation on domestic issues, and we're going to kick off that conversation with the economy. A recent Marist PBS NewsHour poll found that 95% of Americans indicate that they're making a decision this election season based on the economy. In some part, the economy is driving that conversation. So I'm going to ask my friend Jorge to talk to us a little bit about why he thinks that is, and how do we even define the economy?
Thank you, Jen, and quick note of thanks to Nikki and Aspen. My name is Jorge Lima. I'm a part of Cohort 3, Ain't No Mountain, Civil Society Fellow. So really quick to kick it off, Jen, I would say there are many different definitions to the economy, so I won't pretend to pull out the magical definition from my pocket. The first of which I think is the obvious one, right? There are very real kind of realities to one's ability to meet someone's their own needs. But I think if we cut ourselves short if we just stick to that one definition, and if you have the ability to kind of even go beyond that, I think the economy to me, and why I think so many Americans continue to say it's the number one issue, it's a common language that speaks to all of our aspirations as Americans, right? It is the economy where you can interact and figure out, does my work have meaning? Can I contribute in a meaningful way? Am I being rewarded for the type of things that I do? Am I able to build things that will outlive me, that will allow me to give back to to my children or to the next generation? A sense of excitement. Is there the ability to create something, build something that's innovative or entirely new that can help the way that we think of life today? And then the reality is, if you're not experiencing that, if those are your aspirations, but the economy is actually not functioning in a way that allows you to see that your efforts have meaning, to see that you're able to contribute to something that's going to outlive you, you start to get very concerned. And so to me, the conversation around the economy and why so many Americans continue to list it as their number one thing is, again, this idea of the day-to-day realities. So are you able to meet your needs? But I think there's a deeper conversation that most Americans want to have, and perhaps the economy is that one kind of shared language that allows us to talk about those other aspirations that we hold.
Thank you, Jorge. Lillian, we talked a little bit about this, people's feelings and needs around the economy. Why don't you help us understand if there are economic metrics that are strong? In some ways we hear that fundamentals are strong, that people shouldn't be concerned. Everybody seems to be concerned. The cost of those items at the grocery store are still going up. They haven't seemed to cease. And so how do we understand why people are feeling so anxious about the economy?
Thank you. So I'll say what we are experiencing, popular media, is the strongest economy. Oh, Lillian Singh, Washington, D.C. metro area by way of Jackson, Mississippi, but I grew up in L.A., go Dodgers.
This is not supposed to be divisive.
So where I was headed briefly is I worked at the intersection of race and the economy for a very long time. I mean, what the data tells us right now is that all races have experienced the most economic gains in like the last 4 or 5 years. But all races are also experiencing what we call asset poverty. People are feeling that what's true, that they don't have 3 months of just security in the bank if something was to happen. And that's irrespective of race. Another thing that's really real right now is that the data says that people are employed. But what we're not talking about is that people are actually employed, but wage theft, not actually making a living wage to actually handle and battle the cost of living, right, in their respective cities. What we're also not told and talked about in a real way is the cost burden of housing. Housing is 1/3 of a family's income, right, that they bring home. And I said the statistics, and Jennifer was like, girl, is that real? Is that a real statistic? So Policy Link talks about this. It's a national think tank out in California, that there is 100 million Americans finding themselves living below the federal poverty level. So let's just talk about what that is, and I'm gonna sit down. Single families, single person, $12,000 a year. family of 4, 25,000. So who can afford to live in America and feel like the economy is working for them, right? I would say that it's working just the way it was supposed to be working for the few, and the masses are left out. So that's why folks are experiencing and saying that we need to actually address housing, childcare, transportation. And I actually just want one job, not 5.
Thank you, Lillian. You mentioned housing, and I think that's top of mind for so many people across the country. We've been seeing the price of housing is just skyrocketed, right, in the last few years. And what we've always thought of as the American dream of home ownership seems to be unattainable for folks. Caleb, I'd love to know what you think about housing as part of the American dream.
Thank
And
you.
make sure to introduce yourself and where you're from, please.
My name is Caleb Cage from Reno, Nevada. I'm a Colorado Rockies fan, so I don't think that's divisive at all. The question about housing and whether or not it should be defined as a part of the American dream, I think the question for me comes down to is who's defining that. I think if we look over the last 40 or 50 years, we could look at college education, house with the picket fence, all of those things as being sort of defined as parts of what we call the American dream. And what has undermined those is, I believe what has undermined those is government engagement in those sectors that has said, this is what you should have, and therefore you should take out loans in order to accomplish these things. And I think what that has done is it's made housing skyrocket. I think we saw that in 2008. I think we may be seeing that again. I think I have young kids, but someday I'm going to be encouraging them to figure out how to pay for college on their own because I'm not going to be able to. It's going to be absurd. And I think a lot of that is because we've made this an element of the capital A, capital D American dream that everybody should have, instead of saying, these are the opportunities that we can provide. Go decide what you want to be your dream. However, having lost this sort of unifying concept, to Jorge's point earlier about the economy being a common language, I think that's a part or a symptom of where we stand as a society, where we don't know what a common unified definition of America is anymore either. I think it's an impossible problem.
Does anybody have an opposing view on the American dream of housing they'd like to bring in the room? That we should pursue that American dream?
Right here.
Marlon.
So good afternoon, everyone. Marlon Peterson, Brooklyn, New York. I'm a Knicks fan. Say something. I want to give a shout out to my team, the College and Community Fellowship. They allow me to be here. There's a couple of things around this. One is that when we think about the American dream, you think about historically that's around the New Deal, right? And there are a lot of things around that we can rethink. But the other part of it is this, is that, the notion of the white picket fence, we have people who are trying to have a functioning white porcelain toilet bowl in their house, right? And it's really about being able to live a life in which you feel that you can take care of your family and that you can have a productive lifestyle, a productive life. I think to move the goalposts ahead to say that a house is something that we need to think about differently as a part of the dream. I don't think a lot of our folks haven't gotten that place yet, right? The majority of people in this country haven't gotten that yet. The majority of people in this country are renters, right? But I understand the notion of using that as a metaphor. I do think that we at this particular point, in this inflection point, with a very important question, and it's really about a question based around the economy. Like, is housing a stepping stone to legacy and ownership and being able to pass things down? I think that we need to think about all the other factors that go into play that prevent people from even being able to get, as I said before, people still need a functioning white porcelain bowls in their apartments, right? A lot of our people do. And I think we need to think about like where they're at right now. Because oftentimes I could bookend it with this, is that this is a middle class dream. And while the goal of many of us is to be in the middle class or above, so many of us are on the working poor and working class, and we need to think about what their needs are and what aspirations look like for them. Not taking away and not raising not saying that we need to have a low bar for them, but we also need to pay attention to the fact that there's so many things in between that can get before they can get to a stable enough experience where they can now think about building income and wealth to be able to own a home.
So if there's policy drivers, so Caleb's indicating there's some policy decisions that have been made that sometimes make that impactful, that you can't. We've made decisions as a government. They're intervening in ways that aren't helpful. We also hearing this opposing viewpoint that we need to make sure that there are opportunities for people to move up. What's one quick fix in about 45 seconds that we could do to fix the economy, Jorge?
I'm going to piggyback on the theory of housing here, and I would broaden it, right? I think housing, I'm not talking about home ownership in my sense. The ability for you to choose where you want to live so that you can pursue your dreams should not be as hard as it is right now, right? So if people want to live in a big city or want to live out rural, there should be available housing options that allow people to do that. One quick fix is we've got to increase the number of housing units available.
Okay, thank you. See, I knew we were going to have a good solution in the room. One of the drivers of the economy, and one of the things that has so many people concerned, is the rising cost of healthcare. Right, and we aren't going to have a quick fix for healthcare, just like we're not going to have for the economy. But I'm going to throw it over to Isaiah to lead us in a discussion about healthcare.
Jen, I appreciate that. And I think moving from this idea of economic self-sufficiency to really thinking about healthcare costs is an important transition. And so the first question that I'm going to throw to you, Kody. We have the most expensive healthcare, not only probably in the world. And I think the numbers are out to suggest that. What do we do to ensure return on investment or more bang for our buck?
Lillian, do you mind if I borrow? Thanks so much. I'm Kody Kinsley. I'm from Raleigh, North Carolina. It's great to be here with everyone. Yep, sure. So the numbers are clear. The United States spends more on healthcare than any other country in the world, and almost twice that of the next runner-up, which flips between Switzerland and Germany, depending on the year. And yet at the same time, we saw for the last few years our life expectancy going sideways or down. We've seen infant mortality rates increasing, and we're challenged with diseases that we thought were long eradicated. And I think there's an important distinction here that's, I think, fundamental to the understanding, which is that there's a difference probably between healthcare and health. And what really drives health is often the things that the healthcare system doesn't currently invest in. And so how do we get upstream? What does good access to healthy food look like? Transportation, housing, et cetera. And so I think there's a huge efficiency argument here that is actually broadly bipartisan, if frankly nonpartisan, which is that, let's spend those dollars more wisely. Let's put them and invest in things that would render more health over the lifespan. And that is really important. I think this ties into this question about what do we deserve, or what is our right in this country. And it's, I think, an observation of mine that we generally believe, I think if we were to poll folks, that if folks end up on the doorstep of an emergency room, they're going to not get turned away, and then it would be wrong to turn them away. And yet that is the most expensive place to provide care. It is also the place where, if you're treating the illness there, you have missed opportunities to do it sooner for a better quality outcome earlier. And so I think to pull the thread on that is just, how do we get upstream? How do we prevent the ED, which means paying for things that needs to happen sooner?
Thank you, Kody. And as we opened up, Nikki kind of said between right and wrong, or right doing and wrong doing, there's a field or a clearing. I think my job here is to throw a lightning rod in the middle of the clearing. So this next question is healthcare an earned privilege or a right? I'm going to throw to you, Caleb, for that one.
So Caleb Cage again. I don't think it's a right, and I don't know necessarily that it's an earned privilege if I would frame it either way. But I think we have to be very careful about what we make rights, because once we make something a right, then we give the government the ability to determine and to define how we live within those rights. And for me, as somebody who loves my individual freedom, I don't want the government telling me that I can't smoke cigarettes. I don't smoke cigarettes anymore, but that I can't eat what I want, that I can't do the things I want, or much more important healthcare choices that are out there. And beyond that, I just don't see what we would base that on individually. In this country, that has, in a very flawed way, focused on negative rights instead of positive rights. I have a negative right to free speech. I do not have a positive right to be kept alive at the expense of other people, no matter what. So philosophically, if we're asking about rights, I would say no.
Caleb, thanks for that answer. From a values perspective, I'm going to ask you, Kody, to kind of respond to that.
So I think that sorry, I'm supposed to stand. I think that few people will have, or there are few things that people will have in their lives than as existentially unsettling as a terminal diagnosis, a major health scare. And yet, as much as that is existential, it is also universal. And so I think this is where I'm challenged with, you know, health. I believe that access to health is a right because it's probably one of the few things that is truly universal in our experience. And to pull that thread, and like, I just want to spend money wisely, like, you know, providing people access with care that lowers costs and improves health and achieves that goal is possible. And I think often where these things get tied up that are hard to untangle is, you know, people don't want it to be right because we don't want to spend money on something for someone else. Well, there is an answer to spend money for something for someone else without it being nearly as expensive as it is today.
Would any of our other panelists like to share anything on this topic? I've got a pocket full of lightning rods if you don't worry. All right, so next lightning rod. Abortion has been a hot topic, both on the left and the right. You knew I was going to do it. On the left and the right. How do we ensure that these seemingly intractable kind of positions on this find some common ground? And I'm going to throw this one in the air, and anybody who wants to answer it, Jorge, can answer it.
I'll answer it. I'll give Jorge a break. I'm Andrew Pappas, Civil Society Fellow from Phoenix, Arizona. And, you know, this is obviously an extraordinarily fraught topic. I think one place to begin is by recognizing that it's an extraordinarily fraught topic, that it's very complicated, and that there aren't easy answers on either side of the issue. I will say in Arizona, I think this topic in 2024 is being addressed in serious ways by the democratic process. Beginning of the year, we had a decision from the Arizona Supreme Court deciding that a pre-statehood law, it had been enacted in 1864, it was a total ban on abortion, it was effective again in the wake of Roe versus Wade's demise. What followed was a very vigorous debate in the legislature that repealed that pre-statehood ban and reinstituted a 15-week law that the legislature had enacted in 2022 in anticipation of the Dobbs decision. And now we have on the ballot currently a citizen-initiated initiative measure that would put the Roe versus Wade standard in the Arizona Constitution. And I think most people think that initiative is likely to pass by a pretty significant margin in a state that is otherwise very evenly divided politically. Now, I suppose where you fall on the substantive question about abortion is going to determine in part your perception of this process and whether it's going to lead to a good outcome or a bad outcome. I think the fact that the process itself is happening and that it is giving rise to serious debate among voters, among legislators, among justices of the Arizona Supreme Court is itself something to be hopeful about, because there aren't that many issues that I think are receiving that kind of serious public attention and that are going to be resolved in the political process. Now, whether it's going to be resolved once and for all, I seriously doubt. I suspect that we will continue in Arizona and around the country to argue about this issue because it is so important and it is so complicated. But I think we've begun to lose trust in our ability to resolve hard questions in the democratic process. I think this is one instance where we are doing that as we speak, and that should give all of us some reason for hope.
Turn this on. One more minute, and I guess my last question will be, and it's going to be one of those 45-second questions, but Robert Putnam talks a whole lot about this idea of socialism and social anxiety and folks being separate. What is your position or thoughts on how we address the mental health crisis that exists in our country?
Well, I mean, I think this connects to the healthcare question, right? I think we do a good job, let me say a terrible job of separating mental health from our physical health, right? It's a health issue. Your mental health impacts your physical health and vice versa. So a couple of things regarding that. I think that one, if we considered, you know, that in terms of that juxtaposition, if it's a right or a privilege or however you want to frame it, just think about the outcomes, right? You know, from an outcomes-based perspective, and think about particularly like mental health, right? If we invest in the health of folks more robustly and in a way that we haven't ever done, we've never done in this country, it'll help us in some of the other issues that we are going to speak about, criminal justice and all these other things, right? That's kind of like how I see it, right? I'm in New York City. Definitely since the pandemic, we have seen an uptick in what we see as people with mental health instabilities. And that has led to other things. You know, you hear about the crimes on the subway and all these other things that are happening, right? So if we look at the root of it, somebody's unhealthy. We start at the end game. We start at the end like they did the thing. But we have an opportunity to look at this issue differently. We are investing in the well-being of America, right? Because right now we can see it all around us. We have an unhealthy nation. That's why we're having this conversation here today, right? So I'm just sort of thinking about the mental health conversation and putting that into the same frame as just general health care. We got to look at, I think we should look at it as a right, because it is a right for us. We should want this nation to flourish. And right now it isn't. And part of the reason why it is because we haven't shifted in the way we address things. Looking at healthcare is a thing that we are investing in our nation. As a father, I ended like as a father, it is why wouldn't I invest in the health of my daughter at this age or wait until she gets sick and say, well, you know, you ain't that sick, or, you know, if I'm investing in my daughter from infancy, from birth, right? I think, and because we believe in children having a right to live, some of us believe that, I think we should think about healthcare and mental health differently. We should robustly invest in it. It should be a right, in my opinion, because we believe in the health of our nation.
Thank you so much, Marlon. And thank you everyone who contributed to that conversation. We're going to transition from what was a robust conversation about social economic self-sufficiency, and then a conversation about healthcare and affordable healthcare. And now we're going to make a transition to immigration. And this is coming from a community or a country that has many lightning rods or many things that are divisive, but still a number of people from all over the world want to make this home. So I'm going to come to you first, Yordanos, if you don't mind. We have about 16 minutes for this conversation on immigration. 16 minutes for this conversation on immigration. Yordanos, how should a nation of immigrants consider its borders?
First, thank you so much to Nikki, Civil Society Fellowship, and Aspen for organizing this conversation. I'm part of the second class Constellations, along with Caleb, Will, Darius, and probably others on Zoom. And before we get into the really meaty topic of immigration, I just want to say that I'm a Real Madrid fan, and we went through a very traumatic experience yesterday. So I'm not following any of the sports that are happening currently in this country. So I speak on this issue as an immigrant, not as a subject matter expert, right? I became a US citizen on September 1st, 2016 to vote in the 2016 presidential election because I felt that even though I live in Massachusetts and fully understanding the flaws with the electoral process, still felt like as an individual, it was important for me to cast my vote in that election, and the outcome of that election has fundamentally changed my life and my career trajectory. I would not be doing the work that I am doing now if it weren't for that election. And so when it comes to this question, I think it goes back to Caleb, the point you made about what does it mean to be an American, who is an American right now, and we don't have a common understanding of that. Even the fact that you refer to this as a country of immigrants is, I think, something that people would debate, right? Because it's this idea of, is America a place or is America a vision? And I think we're nuanced enough to say that it can be both a vision and a place, right? You don't have to have multi-generational connection to a specific land in America for you to be an American. And so coming back to the immigrant question, and I think this relates to this because ultimately, either unless someone is Native American, we're all immigrants, right? It's just, you know, how far back do you go and trace your roots back to immigration? Either your ancestors were forcibly brought here or somebody in your lineage came to this country and settled here. And so when we talk about immigration today, I think we have to look at it from a really nuanced perspective. Both parties have failed in putting in place a comprehensive immigration reform plan. And I think as a nation of immigrants, if we do agree with that concept, I think it's really important for us to think about the benefits of immigration in order to have a thriving economy, an economy of innovation. As our demographics shift, this country is fueled by immigrants, right? And I think we need to acknowledge that. At the same time, we operate in a world of nation states. And so it is important for us to have processes that allow people to come into this country through legal means, to have efficient ways for processing asylum applications, and also to have secure borders, right, that enable those who commit to adhering to the laws and principles of this country to continue to fulfill that commitment. When I became a citizen, I made a very conscious set of choices about what I am committing to doing to be an American. And I think that wasn't something that was passed on to me. I was the last person to become a citizen in my family. And I took that oath very seriously. And so when I talk to other immigrants, you know, there are conflicted views about, you know, undocumented immigration and open borders because, you know, people take that oath very, very seriously. And so I think we can, hopefully we can come to a policy that helps us understand and hold these nuanced perspectives of having security while also being open to immigration.
Thank you, Yordanos. So Jorge, Will, Andrew, Kody, same question. And even leaving room for you to question the question. But the question is, how should a nation of immigrants, you can question that, consider its borders?
I'm happy to jump in. I mean, I would echo a lot of what was just said. And I thought it was very well said in terms of at least what we've seen of what the American people want, right? The country still very much believes, if you look at polling, that we should be welcoming to immigrants. It is part of the American culture and something that people actually still aspire to. Now, at the same time, they hold this belief that we should also have a system that is clear, that is fair, that is orderly, and that people can look to it and say, it's working. And that's also not happening. And so when you have those two things kind of all meshed together, some are taking advantage of this issue and using it to divide us, when I think most people, even if they don't know all the nuances, would say that they want something that's both secure but welcoming. And that should hopefully lead us down a path that works. But to me, that's what I think, to answer your question specifically, how should we, and we can be both, and I guess I want to make sure I say that, you could be both welcoming and have an immigration system that allows for security at the border. How we do that, I leave it to a lot of other experts, but I actually don't think it's that hard. I fly in and out of a lot of airports, and they seem to understand how to make sure you're still welcoming people into the country in some sort of orderly fashion. So it isn't something that we have to reinvent. Now, I do think that our border right now is at its case because of years of really bad kind of policy overall, but more the lack of ignoring the issue, right? We have led ourselves to this position, and we need people with serious ideas to really come in and say, we aren't just going to use this for a couple speeches every couple of years, but we're actually dedicated to solving it. There's a lot of layers that make that very difficult, but the country can do it. You can be both welcoming and secure.
If you don't mind if I follow up on this idea of leading in pathways, what will it take for us to deliver an effective pathway to U.S. citizenship?
I mean, I would start with the answer is that you need someone who's willing to put skin in the game to solve the problem, because again, it's not difficult. We have pathways. We just heard a story of a pathway, right? So the pathways exist. They are still very archaic. They are very difficult. They are not at all robust to the level of what our country and our economy need. But again, if we just look at this in terms of numbers, I think we failed the bigger picture. America's history, her success, and hopefully her future is about this idea of being welcoming, so that, as alluded to earlier, anyone from anywhere can be American, and that's very unique to this country, and I think it's important to preserve that. But those pathways to citizenship are there today. We just need to update them. We need to make sure that they are accessible by more people, particularly changing to the people who need to access them today. Those are both people living here or people who are international. But we need a serious discussion about it and not one that's only happening around election cycles.
In the spirit of serious discussion, I'm going to ask Andrew to take on that same question.
So I think what your question is getting at is a pathway to citizenship for people who are currently here illegally, perhaps, which is obviously a very difficult policy question that I think just has to be resolved through ordinary democratic means. We have to try to somehow to reach some consensus on that very contested question. I mean, one of the things that struck me as I was thinking about this topic in preparation for today is that the policy failures over the course of the last few decades that have left us an immigration system that everyone seems to agree is totally broken, seem to have hardened views on both sides. I suppose one could say that every issue seems more or less polarized today, but immigration in particular seems like one of those issues where you're just in one camp or the other. There just aren't a lot of people who bring to the top the kind of nuance that Jorge does or that Yordanos does. I don't think that makes the problem easier to solve. It makes it drastically more difficult to solve, but I think it also makes it that much more imperative to begin to work on. I have lived almost my entire life in one of two border states, Arizona or California. This is really just sort of impressionistic, but my impression as a kid growing up in southern Arizona, 45 minutes from the Mexican border, was that that the immigration question was much less was much less of a lightning rod 25 or 30 years ago than it is today. Living in Tucson, as I did as a kid, you knew that Mexico was right next door and that Mexican nationals were vital to the local economy. They were certainly vital to the small business that my parents owned. And the intense cultural tensions that currently exist in my state and also exist in other border states, I just don't think existed in the same way then as they do today. And I do think all of that in one way or another is tied to these massive policy failures that have just forced people into their boxes. I think part of the problem is there just aren't a lot of serious people on either side who are interested in solving this problem, in part because it is so politically useful. It is just such an easy way to gin up fervent feelings on one side or the other of the issue.
Do you mind if I follow up?
Sure.
Just through the lens of your personal and professional experience, is it possible for us to have secure borders and welcome immigrants?
Yeah, I think it is. And I think, I think a nation of immigrants, like every nation, has to have borders. I think that's what makes a nation to one degree or another. If you want to see how far the political parties have come on this issue, do no better than to look at Ronald Reagan's farewell address, where he talks about this being a shining city on the hill. And if the city has to have walls, then the walls have to have big doors. And he talks about the concept that Jorge mentioned, that this is the kind of place where anyone can come and be an American. You can't go to Germany and become a German, and you can't go to Switzerland and become Swiss, but anyone can come to America and be an American. And I think that really was that was a spirit that one time animated Ronald Reagan's party. It doesn't seem to animate that party today, but I think secure borders are one of the things that are necessary in order to give people the confidence to welcome people in with the understanding that the country itself has some control over who is coming in and who is not. The reality is that, and we've talked a lot about community. If you put one additional person in this conversation today, it would change the dynamic, because that's how groups are. Every person helps to change the dynamic. I mean, I think if we took that basic insight and applied it to the nation as a whole, it'd be easier to understand why this is such a fraught issue. It does matter who is here. Of course it matters. That doesn't mean we shouldn't be welcoming. We absolutely should be, but I think we also have to recognize that it does change the dynamic, and it does matter. It has cultural and economic and other repercussions. And I think, we should be honest about those things, while also realizing that we need a system that works.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm going to invite the perspective of my Brooklyn brother, Marlon.
I hope I'm not dominating too much time here. But I want to offer a sobering injection at this moment. The way we speak about these people, these folks who are coming into the country, we speak about them in very dehumanizing ways normally. And I'm saying that for the reason of like why we can't get this job done. Part of it is that we dehumanize these folks. So we pick apart, we look for the folks who did that thing, that crime, she, he, they, that did that thing, and say, look what they're doing. Look what they're letting into a country. Look what these folks are doing. And if we were to be honest with ourselves, the majority of people coming to this country are not doing those things. We also realize that part of this population aren't people who just came from the southern border. My parents came to this country and were once illegal. They flew in a plane here and they just overstayed their visa. So have many of my aunts from the Caribbean, from Trinidad, right? And so when we think about these folks, I just wanted to just realize how we talk about these people in the first place. We think about the folks, we speak about the people who are, in hotels in New York City and different places. I see them with children, babies on the train selling candy, and you can tell that these folks probably have come through that experience. And that is so many people. That's so many of those people who are coming in here. My partner who's Haitian, she's had family and friends who have gone from Haiti to South America and made their way up. These people aren't coming here to harm. And I want to offer that sobering conversation, that sobering comment, because yes, I don't want to absolve people when harm does happen in that population. Yes, but there's no population in human history that hasn't committed harm. And there's socioeconomic factors that lead to these sort of things always. But we first got to see these people as human. I don't think enough of us see these folks as human, as whatever their names are and whatever country they come from and what age they are and what their religion is and what their views on abortion is. And we don't see them as having full agency. We see them as problems. So if you see someone as a problem, one way to deal with it is to avoid it, or to find ways to just support and be right about where I see that problem, who those people are. So I'm offering that because while this is not a policy assertion, for us to get to the place where we have policy that is healthy and human, we first got to see the people as valuable assets to our societies.
Thank you, Marlon. Kody, jump in here.
Yeah, so it strikes me that part of our challenge with talking about this issue is that we're not often actually talking about the issue, right? When we're talking about borders and othering people and the difference, like we're really talking about the economy, right? The sense that people feel like they don't have enough for it to last more than 3 months, that it's harder and harder to get by, and that these other folks that are coming here. And so to me, like I actually flip to I think we have to ask the question more about not the supply side, like why are people coming here, or who are these people that are coming here and what they're doing, but to the demand side. Why are they coming here? Well, they're coming here because there's a lot of jobs that people need. Like our labor market is tighter than it has been in a very, very long time. If you need a nurse right now, it's going to be hard to find one unless we do something about immigration. If you want to have anybody help you in the retail sector, it's going to be really hard. I was listening to a political person this morning talk about how, they voted on a very controversial bill in a way that people didn't think they would want to because they're worried about farm workers, right? If you enjoy cheap food. And so to me, I hear you on the human piece, and I think that's important. I think we have to remember the humanity of this, but I also think we have to broaden the conversation into the economic drivers. If we want to try to build a broader coalition around this conversation to actually move things forward, I think we have to talk about the basic puts and takes, which is this country is huge, it is growing, and it needs to grow faster if the economy is going to work.
Thank you, Kody. I'm going to throw another 45-second question out here because I have the opportunity to. Thank you, Sam. So from an even-handed perch, comprehensive reform seems out of reach, at least near term. What is one fix that you would offer for maximum impact on this particular issue?
Hi, I'm Aisha Francis. I am in the Civil Society Fellowship for Fortitude. We need more visas. We need more intermediate opportunities for people who are here to work, and we need a faster process for work permits and work permitting because there are people here, and I think that is, it's a way to manage some of the pent-up demand for workers in a way that's legal. So that's what I would offer.
Thank you, Aisha. I typically don't let go of my microphone. That's my power, but that was shared power. Yordanos.
It's not a policy It's not a policy solution, but I do think we need a mindset shift because while I agree with you that I think, you know, particularly as the demographics shift and I haven't even said the idea, but clearly it's a winner. But the point being that I do think I think we need to get out of this mindset of looking at people as assets or liabilities, right? Like it's like, oh, we need them to fuel the economy. Of course, immigrants are critical to fueling the economy. However, I think to the point that you were making about just not seeing people, you know, we don't have to dehumanize or create another category of class of people, right? So I think we need like this cultural moment where we need to actually, I think, reframe who we define as immigrants. It's currently it's 50 million people in America. It's a lot, including myself, right? It's a lot of people. And those are the people that are just, those are just the recent immigrants, right? And so I think we need to get out of this frame that like immigrants are just those that are, you know, trying to cross the border. They are members of this. They are Americans. We're here and we're part of this country and we're building this country. And so I think we need to reframe and I think reconceptualize what it means to be an immigrant and in relation to what it means to be an American, because I think that changes the calculation around about economy, rules, etc. So I'll stop there.
No, we're on teams. So I want to thank everyone for their contributions to that conversation on immigration. We are now going to transition to a new topical area, and Jen is going to lead us through that. Know that we have 16 minutes here, and then we're going to go to the chat with Joe just after.
Yeah, I was just going to say we want to encourage questions in the chat, and then others in the room will create an opportunity for you at the end if you would like to ask a question of any of the fellows. It strikes me that the conversation so far has been interesting and robust and full of this or that. And it seems to be back to that labels conversation we started at the beginning. We're either assets or liabilities. Healthcare is either a right or a privilege. And so often we find ourselves on one side or the other. And I always encourage the conversation around holding two ideas in your head at the same time. And when it comes to immigration, I often think I grew up on the South Texas border, 15 minutes from Mexico. I want to know who's coming into my country and I want secure borders, and I can have compassion for a mom that pushes her kid in a stroller across a continent to come for a better life. And I think most people can hold those two ideas in their head. We just need policymakers and elected officials that are willing to have those nuanced conversations. So thank you for the conversation thus far. I'm going to pivot to a conversation around criminal justice system, the criminal legal system, why we define those things differently. And I want to start off by asking my friend Ryan Zuidema, Chief of Police, to talk to us a little bit about how we can balance the need for public safety and keeping our communities safe with civil liberties.
Thanks, Jen. Ryan Zuidema, Lynchburg, Virginia, by way of Buffalo, New York. For those of you who drink Jack Daniels, it's not Lynchburg, Virginia. It's Lynchburg, Tennessee. I've already had 3 people ask me if I brought any, so I didn't. But no, I think this topic, you know, as I sit and listen to everybody talk and eloquently make the statements they did, you know, what really strikes me is that how all these things are so interconnected, right? And they're absolutely interconnected when we talk about criminal justice. And you know, my view and kind of my experience is, you know, how do we balance the things that Jen talked about? And we've got to do that in a way, especially in some of our marginalized communities where people don't feel over-policed and underprotected. And that sounds like an oxymoron, right? But if the only time the police show up in your neighborhood is when bad things are happening and they lock somebody up and take them away, we're missing opportunities to build those relationships, right? At the core of what we do as human beings is just relationships, right? And if we can build those well, then all the other stuff will start to fall into place, right? But what we see, unfortunately, across any political divide or any other differences is, I think, a lack or willingness of people to build those relationships, right? Because we just want to go to our corners, right, and identify with whatever we identify with. And so 2020, George Floyd, unless you lived under a rock, changed the landscape of law enforcement in our country. And we had some riots in our community, and after those riots, we went out and we intentionally held what we call listening sessions. So we had a moderator come in. We went into the communities that struggled with trust with the police, traditionally African American communities in my community, and we sat and listened. And the moderator literally told me and others, "You're not even going to get a microphone. You're just going to sit and listen to people talk to you, about you, and share their feelings." And I had a woman at one of those who came up. She was probably 50 years old or so, maybe a little older, and said, "Look, we want you and we need you in our community." Speaking of the police, we just want you to treat us appropriately. I have one son who's in prison. He's going to spend the rest of his life there. I have another son who is on his way back there for his third time, she said. I understand what they did is wrong. I understand they need to be held accountable. We just want you all to treat us well, right? And to me, that was a huge statement, because I think if we listen to the talking heads, right, of a lot of these folks that speak on behalf of these communities, for starters, they rarely live in those communities, right? And they don't speak for those people. A lot of times, very bluntly, they are taking advantage of these folks because they make money off of whatever that topic is or that issue is, right? And so I think hearing her say that, it contradicted a lot of what you'd hear in the media, which is that, you know, the African American community doesn't want or need the police there. No, they do. They want and they need. They just want to be treated like human beings, want to be treated appropriately. And of course, law enforcement in America has had a history of not doing that well in the African American community, right? And that's something that we need to make sure we have our young new officers who will come to me and say, well, Chief, I wasn't around when that happened. I didn't do that. You're right, you didn't. But someone wearing the same uniform that you're wearing today did, right? And so we need to make sure that people understand that's passed on from generation to generation. The other thing we need to do to make sure we balance those things is we've got to get to the core issue. There, you know, we deal with so many different challenges, and my friend Marlon said it very well, but you know, the mental health, it is an epidemic. It is such an epidemic in our country, and it impacts so many other things. And rarely do we come across someone who's in a mental health crisis that doesn't have some other co-occurring issue they're dealing with, right? Whether it's some type of chemical dependency, whether it's homelessness, whether it's, you name it, right? All these different things. And so one of the things I'm proud of that we're doing in my community is we have 2 different courts set up outside of the traditional legal system. We have a court that deals with nothing, but it was originally called drug court. It's now called recovery court, right? Those people who have addictions. Now, I'm not talking about your drug dealers, okay? Your drug dealers that are preying on people, they need to get locked up and go to jail for a very long time, because with drugs comes violence, with violence comes all sorts of other terrible things, right? But the people that are truly just addicts, that are breaking into a place to steal something so they can pawn it to have 20 bucks to go buy a rock of cocaine or a hit of meth or whatever it may be, those folks need treatment. They don't need to get locked away in jail, because we're just going to repeat that cycle over and over again. And then the other court we have that's up and running is a mental health court. So again, folks that are challenged with mental health crisis, that are out there that get involved in the criminal justice system, right? Those folks, again, we're not talking about people that are out there killing individuals. We're talking about people with lower level offenses that need treatment so they don't continue to be recidivists in the criminal justice system. So it's a fine line. We've got to maintain order. We've got to have things that take the worst of the worst out of our communities. But those are few and far between. We have such a small number of individuals in our communities that are responsible for a disproportionate amount of crime. And those folks we need to eradicate from our communities, and they need to go away for a very long time. But the rest of the other folks that have all these other issues we're talking about, we need to treat the core issue and not the symptom of the issue. So thank you, Jen.
Thanks so much, Ryan. Let me grab that from you and hand it over to our friend Will. And Will, I kind of teased this at the very beginning, but this conversation around justice and who deserves to be locked up or not. And you have a very strong point around why we should be calling it the criminal legal system, not the criminal justice system. I think it's an important definition for us to start. I'd love you to introduce that conversation to the room.
When I was a baby public defender, I had the privilege of representing somebody who was charged with possessing 2 crack rocks and 3 pills. And they were facing 20 years to life, not for possession with intent to distribute, not for actual distribution, but for being somebody who clearly had a substance use issue. I don't call the system a criminal justice system, because what I have seen has actually been a lack of justice. not only in terms of the survivors of crime who are trying to seek accountability and justice from their lens, but also the people who are being accused of crime and the ways that they are treated and sent to prisons that actually do not secure safety. They don't promote public safety. They are positioned to be a tool of accountability, but I don't think it's the actually only way in which we can hold people accountable. I say criminal legal system because that's what it is. It is a legal system focused on enforcing criminal statutes that we have agreed upon as a state or as a country. But I describe my work as trying to create a justice system that is worthy of its name, because I think we can actually get to justice. But to get to justice, we all have to have our own definitions of justice. For me, justice is the currency that we spend to repair harm. So if we're thinking about that person that I had the privilege of representing, who was charged with possessing 2 crack rocks and 3 pills that he did not have a prescription for, is justice sending him to prison for 20 years? I think most of us would probably say no. Would justice be getting him substance use treatment and help? I think most of us would say yes. But at least in Louisiana, where I'm visiting from, Will Snowden Civil Society Fellowship, New Orleans, we have to recognize that the system that we have inherited is not doing what we need it to do. Some people will say it's working as designed, right? It's not doing what we need it to do, which is to promote public safety, to provide accountability, but more importantly, thinking about how we're preventing crime from happening in the first place. I often describe public safety as a two-sided coin. On one side, we have prevention. On the other side, we have accountability. I believe if we can overinvest on the prevention side, we have to rely less on the accountability side, right? When Ryan talks about the need to address people with mental health issues, the need to address people with substance use issues, right? We need to be serving those people in a different way and not necessarily have to use the criminal legal system to be the provider of those services. And then that creates space for us to do 2 things. One, right now I think police in the United States have way too many responsibilities on their plate, right? 2, we can actually get more focus on the people who might be contributing to incidents of violence in our cities, so we can figure out what are the appropriate interventions for those individuals. I often describe the criminal legal system as the catch basin for the failures of the other systems, right? So when our access to quality education fails, or when our access to fair housing fails, or our access to jobs fail, or our access to mental health treatment fails, more of those people are going to be having contact with the criminal legal system. And that sets us up for failure, because what it does is it tries to suggest that we should be focusing on the people as problems instead of the problems that are creating the problems in front of us, which are failed systems. So I use the terminology criminal legal system because it is a legal system. Justice is what we're trying to achieve. And until we have a uniform understanding of what justice means, it's going to kind of continue to oscillate between what it actually should be representing and what I think we all actually can agree upon.
Thank you, Will. Marlon, I'm going to come back to you. This question of the justice system, the legal system, when folks have found themselves in the system and then outside of the system, I'm curious how you would have us think about folks who've been incarcerated, people that are incarcerated now. Tell us a little bit about how we should be considering that segment of the population.
Yeah, thanks for the question. You know, I think about the organization I run now. It's a 25-year-old organization that supports women who have been in the system through higher education and other possibilities for their lives. 25-year-old organization that went a quarter of a century been serving this population. That program was started in a women's prison with women in prison. So I'm gonna bring that up. There's a valuable resource in people inside of these facilities. I'm standing before you as one of those people who's once in one of those facilities, right? I think about some numbers, and it's 6% of people who leave incarceration have a post-secondary degree. 45% leave with some sort of education or certification. I think about that. You may say, well, do we expect that from people from prison? What I'm trying to sort of radically show is that if you invest in this population of folks, your outcomes can be very different in terms of the health of our overall communities, right? Now, I know we mentioned about asset versus deficit, but the reason why I say asset because for the most part, when we have this conversation about people from my population, we think about all the problems they can bring, We think about all the problems that they can bring based on the problems that they caused before. And what I'm saying is that, one, there is no incorrigible segment of our society. There's no segment of society that is unmalleable, that cannot change. That's the first thing, right? But the second thing is that, like, there are proven, evidence-based initiatives that have proven to have returns on investment that were not only for reintegration in communities, but in terms of how the different sectors from which people move in to post-incarceration. The other thing I just want to add into that, when we think, when we think about this criminal legal system, I align with that, William. The only thing about, we stop at like police and the courts, right? But understand that this is the police, this is the courts, this is the jails, these are the prisons, these are probation, these are parole, this is the federal detention system. Like, these are all the places from which, first of all, don't all communicate, right? You attest to that. They don't all communicate in terms of data and whatnot. That's the first thing. And if you don't have the right data, you know what can happen when you don't have the right data. But there's all these touch points where we're missing possible fixes, right? We're missing all possible fixes. And, so to bookend and go back to the whole, when I mentioned about immigration, I'm speaking about humanizing folks, right? I think when the folks thought about the Aspen Institute, they didn't think about somebody like me being able to be a value add to this conversation, right? And what I'm asking folks to think about is to radically think differently, is the value add of this population. You might be scared of it. I understand it. We all have triggers. We have traumas from people who have harmed. I have been on both sides of being harmed. But I also understand, as somebody who's an expert in that place, I also have a criminal justice degree, right? That I got while in prison, is that I knew that people around me had a lot of things to add to our communities. And now, working with this population for the last 15 years or so, I have seen it. I'm not one, I'm one of many. There's 70 to 100 million people in this country living with a criminal conviction. 70 to 100 million people living in this country with a criminal conviction. Just think about that. Let that settle in for a little bit. So what we're saying is that, if I want to reframe this conversation, is we have a tremendous amount of possibility in our neighborhoods. That's a hard way to look at this conversation, but I think that's what we're here for, right? I bring this conversation, I bring that radically different perspective here because of that experience, and despite that experience. And so what I'm saying is that, to answer your question, I think, and let's lead into Ryan. Ryan and I have been in dialogue over the years around these sort of things, and we come from different experiences. But the point is, though, is like, one place that we can meet is definitely the mental health component. Right? My experience is that so many people in that place should not be there because of where their mental capacities were, right? But I'll end with saying that, like, one of the ways to do is to really rethink how we see these folks. There is an opportunity there, and these folks are also credible messengers that can lead to the public safety that we need, because they have the credibility and the influence to speak to people who are currently going through some of the things they went through when they were younger.
Thank you for bringing that to the room, Marlon. I'm going to turn it over to Joe in just a second to see what kinds of questions we have coming in from the chat. I want to just return to something I said at the very beginning, this concept of curiosity. And Marlon's talk just reminded me of being curious about, what are we missing out on when we don't think of people who are formerly incarcerated as an asset? What innovation are we missing out on when we don't think about people coming into this country and what they can bring from a value standpoint? What happens when we don't have a mosaic like this room? Whose voices are missing out? What new idea, what solution are we not coming to because we're not bringing different perspectives to the table? And so I listen to all these sound bites and these ideas that we've been able to share today, thinking about, we're so much better together, and we have different perspectives. And I always encourage us to think about, when we create tables and rooms and spaces and leadership boards, are we thinking about the voices that are missing and what we're missing out on? That solution that could be fixing problems, creating new opportunities. So Joe, I'm going to throw it over to you to see what kind of questions are coming in from the chat. Let's get the microphone from Caleb. Yeah, just turn it on.
Yay. So I want everyone to know that we have folks tuning in from Chicago, New Orleans, Nashville, Denver, Houston, Seattle, Kansas City, but also like North Carolina, South Carolina, New York, New Mexico, Oregon, and Costa Rica, just to show the diversity of like geography that we have. The first question we've kind of got, this theme is around why they showed up today and what they were interested in hearing. So Priya from Dallas, she's class 4, joined today's discussion because she found it hard to have conversations about actual issues as opposed to top-line talking points about candidates and issues right now in her community. And so she'd love to hear how you all are pushing beyond the surface to have more meaningful everyday interactions. And Deborah from Brooklyn just loved Priya's question because she's been thinking about the same thing. And Deborah has also pointed out that nearly 70% of Americans are feeling anxious about the election, and that anxiety leads to poor outcomes on many levels.
So we're going to open it up to any fellow that'd like to answer, and I think we just encourage brief answers at this point so we can get as many perspectives. Does anybody want to give some advice or offer some thoughts around what they're doing to create those kinds of spaces where you can talk about issues and get below the surface? Jorge.
I'll go only because I find myself like loving this theme at the moment. I'm a proud dad of 2 daughters, 9 and 10-year-old, Marina and Catalina, and we've been very cognizant of teaching them the importance of having their own views and speaking up to it. And we live on Capitol Hill here in DC, but all of our family is back in Miami and Florida, and we go back and forth between the two and have a lot of very different and broad conversations. But one of the ways that I found this to be successful is to, one, we don't adhere to the rule that you can't talk about religion, race, or politics. Like that's not, you are allowed to talk about those if you want to at our dinner table or with your friends. It's up to you, as long as you're respectful. The second one is I purposely talk to the adults in my world to let them know that if we're doing this in front of the children, they are committed to both having the discussion and then breaking some sort of bread afterwards, because we need to show the kids that you are free to disagree. We're still going to be friends after it, right? It doesn't end. To do that, I make sure that I plan or try to plan these discussions as much as I can so that they're organic. I don't want to force anybody into these conversations. I'm not about to drop it in the kids' drop-off line at school where everybody's about to like rush off to work. But like if we have friends over for dinner and this comes up, we're going to have the discussion, and then we're still going to stay for dinner. We're still going to stay for dessert, and people are going to, my children are going to be able to see that we model this conversation through. Some of these are more successful than others, but I can tell you that I have yet to have people kind of literally just walk out the room, even after some very heated disagreements, one of which is my own uncle, right? At one point, I literally stopped him at the door and I said, you told me you were going to show my daughters that we were sticking this through. And he turned around and he sat down, and we had barrels of laughs for the next hour, and our girls got to see that.
Barrels of laughs are always a good way. Any of the other fellows want to share anything they're doing in that regard? Adam Taylor. Isaiah, don't give him your mic. I mean, give him your mic.
Thank you. Adam Taylor, Mission Redemption. So one of the things that I currently lead an organization called Sojourners and work very much in the faith community. And then on the one hand, I have to be kind of honest that faith can be accelerant of polarization in many different respects, but I think it can be one of the strongest, most powerful antidotes and cures. And I've been encouraged because I've seen both in kind of secular spaces, many of you may be familiar with an initiative, an organization called Braver Angels that's trying to foster civil dialogue between Republicans and Democrats and create a kind of a new way of engaging in braver conversation. But there's also a lot of new initiatives in the faith community that are trying to help congregations be able to be a place where people of very different political perspectives come together, engage in deeper relationship building. And one of the strengths that I think the faith community can bring to the table is that we share a common faith identity that, at least in the Christian tradition that I know best, should supersede any other affiliation that we have. That our partisan leanings or affiliations are important, but again, they are, less than, or there certainly should be subservient to our core identity as in terms of faith. And then, one of the things that we are developing is a whole initiative called From Polarization to Unity, and developing a whole series of tools and resources for congregations to help them better navigate this and to be a place where people can come together grounded in some shared values based on our faith that then enables us to have a different kind of conversation that then hopefully can help change things around us. Last thing I'll just say really quickly is that so often faith has been used as kind of a weapon, but again, it could be used as a bridge or as a balm even. And so we developed a statement called a call to civic discipleship that is trying to help inspire Christians of all backgrounds to show up differently in our politics, to really be salt and light, and to embrace a whole series of principles. And so because of time, I won't go through all of that. But again, I think there's incredible potential and power in that.
Thanks, Adam. Joe, do we have other questions?
We do. And I will give a shout out. Class 4 is very strong with the question asking. So little prompts for me, I'm sure. So Justin from Missouri, this is going to be on healthcare. He wants to know if there was more nuance around the healthcare is a right discussion. And Larry also asked what percentage of healthcare costs is administrative or legal compared to healthcare procedures. And then we had another question floating out there about for the US, is there an overemphasis on healthcare at the expense of health?
Yeah, I think for the nuance question, I think we go to Caleb and then maybe Kody.
So Caleb again. I mean, nuance around the question of healthcare is right. I approached it as a question of political philosophy, which is if something is going to be a right, then you therefore have the authority of the government to enforce it. And I think in that narrow scope, it's not, and I'm not defending that position. I think the beauty of this conversation is I didn't disagree with anything Kody said as well. So once you get out of the philosophical conversation of what makes something a right and why, you can get to the values-based discussion and say, where should we be investing? Should we be investing upstream or go back to the United States in 2012 when ACA, this conservative concept that then became a democratic concept that then became the core functioning of our entire healthcare system. These areas, I think, particularly are where that nuance and really the most interesting part of the conversation is.
Yeah, I really appreciate that point, Caleb, and I think that it's fun that these two questions are paired together because in some ways this is a little bit of the thing that we're stuck in, right? Kind of there is a fundamental tension, I believe, in society about people having a right to healthcare. We don't have universal health insurance. We don't have a lot of these kind of universal underpinnings in this country, and so instead we have created a system that employer sponsored primarily, so you get it by virtue of work, which suggests to people that you have to earn it to be able to have it. And then yet we get stuck in this place where, oh gosh, we're spending all this money in the wrong places. So we inject all of these other things to try to control costs, which then yields all of these administrative burden problems. And so we're kind of in this, what I lovingly call a self-licking ice cream cone. And it kind of perpetuates the cycle for no value. And I think it does drive us back to, which is, you know, I can make the argument about all the efficiencies, and I think we were doing that a little bit together, Caleb, but there is an elegance of like, if we just got in at the ground floor and had the basic understanding that everybody was going to have access to some universal basic things in healthcare, we could dramatically simplify the system, and that does flow from this right question. I want to pin in here because I didn't have the chance to say this earlier, and I was so excited about the conversation around mental health and the criminal legal system or criminal justice system. And I just want to like snap it, like 5 years ago, that conversation wasn't happening. Like in tension with this point around immigration, where it feels like we've been stuck for so long and trying to move forward, like think about where drug policy in this country went from 5 years ago to now. And I think we're still learning a lot, like of the open use stuff in Oregon, maybe not working. And, but I think the fact that we are moving forward there is a good place, that we are holding a lot of ideas in the same place. So I think there are things moving in healthcare.
Thank you, Caleb. Thank you, Kody. Kody, I'll tell you, intersectionality was the word of 2021. Thanks for bringing that back for this. And I also don't want a self-licking ice cream cone. I like my ice cream too much. Joe, are there any questions left from
Yeah, we've got two. So I've got one on the economy and then a wrap-up question. So for the economy, Emily from Houston voiced that for her, Texas is much more affordable to pursue homeownership compared to her millennial friends on the coast. And she wants to know about the American dream of housing and if that looks different by region. And then we'll close with our last question.
I'll just say that I'll just be direct. I think it looks different by race. We think about the government inserting itself to create the white middle class with the GI Bill, and housing was amazing then, right? It was affordable. We made it affordable. We gave people on-ramps. And it blows my mind that we are not thinking that like income leads to your ability to buy a house, which is an accelerant for wealth building, full stop. Like if you look at your own portfolio, I promise you, your housing, the cost of your house, the equity in your house is a big percentage of it. That's just statistically speaking. I don't know how we're going to figure out affordable housing because housing is privatized now in a way that when I was in Canada, and I wrap this up, they were talking about how so much is paid for through the government, healthcare being one of them. And I said, are we going to figure out, you guys think we're going to figure out the housing situation in America? I have hope. I'm optimistic about it. But I also want to just name that we're going to have to invest in it the same way we did when we were building the white middle class in the 30s. If we're going to actually close, and I'll just close with this, Mark, that assets for white Americans right now is still $30,000 more than all other people of color. The economy is a huge driver, and folks being underpaid, having not the right types of jobs, wage staff, all that's going on. For the American dream is not like in reach for a lot of people because we've built the system to be that way right now. And I think that we just have to decide through policy whether or not we're going to double down because we know what works. It worked a couple of years ago, guys, whether or not we're going to double down on that. I'm glad I got to say that out loud.
No, thank you, Lillian. And I'll say accounting for racial disparities. Is there a regional perspective on the American dream?
Well, I can throw it out to the last question, which is, how do we do more of this? So Marilyn and Clayton both wanted to know, like Marilyn talked about how she wished she could be in the room and have these long conversations like this. And Clayton's like, are there local chapters or versions of this? So I just want to hold that maybe for closing remarks as a sneak peek, but I didn't mean to cut you off though, Lillian. I'd love to hear your response to the region thing too, if you wanted to add.
I mean, I hold all identities. I was born in rural Mississippi, where it's a lot more affordable than where I grew up, which is South Central Los Angeles, right? Then also where I live right now, which is Bowie, Maryland. Region does make sense. I mean, and it does impact ability, a person's earning potential, which is why I haven't left the DC metro area. Thank you, national nonprofits. But it does matter, right? Where you live is completely connected to the cost burdenship that people experience around housing.
Nikki's taking it over from here.
Well, I don't know about the rest of you, but I am definitely inspired, provoked, curious, and wishing we had more than 90 minutes together today. Does anyone feel that way? Yeah. So I do have one last question before we do a little brief wrap up, and that is, what is your individual obligation to holding a center in the middle of a toxic, polarized environment? What's your individual obligation to holding a center in a toxic, polarized, and perhaps even dangerous environment? Anybody have a reaction? Ryan?
Yeah, so, my role is, requires me to be 100% apolitical, right? And in this time of local, state, and national elections, I think we've got to stay true to what the core is of what we do, whether that's personally or professionally. And there are so many actors out there right now in my profession that are attempting to weaponize us against the opposition, right? And we see that across so many different fronts. So I think the challenge there is, it gets lonely doing that if you're true to your beliefs, right? If you truly have a set group of morals that you are going to take to your grave with you, it gets lonely, right? Because it's so easy to jump onto that bandwagon or that bandwagon, because all of a sudden you've got all these friends who are willing to stand up for you. But the lonely part is doing the right thing and staying true to what you believe in, regardless of the pressures, whether they be political or social or any combination of those. And so I think you've got to be willing to be a little lonely to do the right thing.
And in those moments, perhaps when you feel lonely, you remember this,
Yeah,
even when
no,
you're not in
it's-
a room like this.
Yeah, it's a unique space, and shout out to the OGs, which is Class 1. Thank you very much. It was challenging. It was the only 5-year fellowship that I'm aware of that was supposed to be 2 years due to COVID and many other things. But
Right.
I digress.
Thank you, Ryan. Is there anyone who's not a sworn officer who'd like to answer that question?
Can off-duty facilitators join?
You may.
So I'm dad of 4 kids, 13, 10, 7, and 5. And I'll tell you, every day as I'm helping my wife to raise these kiddos, I'm asking myself, do I need to be right or do I need to get it right? And as good stewards of a democracy that is fractured or broken, I think we're still asking ourselves that same question. Do we need to be right or do we need to get it right? And when you commit to getting it right, then when things get difficult, you turn to wonder. I wonder how they got here. I wonder what lived and professional experiences are bringing that out. How do we lean in? That way we can get to that clearing or that space in between right doing and wrongdoing and fix some of the problems. And I think I'm consistently called to that place because I know being right hasn't gotten us to the right place. And so we want to get it right.
Yeah, I'm the quasi-sworn officer. This is the second time I have been in the midst of a major election period when I'm the senior most political person, political appointee in a role, and I feel like so much of what I'm trying to hold for my team right now is the recognition that no matter if the boss changes, the people we serve doesn't change. And to think about our mission more focused on the delivery. And it's really hard. It's really hard for our team, especially for the folks who came in during the current boss, to think about, aside of what may happen to them in their jobs. But if everything changes and the direction changes, that may not be necessarily aligned with their policy and what they would want. But if the policies change, that is actually exactly what is aligned with preserving democracy.
Thank you for that. Please join me in thanking our co-host, Jennifer Sarver and Isaiah Oliver, for doing such a great job today. And continue your applause for our chat host, Joe Jensen, holding it down online. And extend your gratitude to our fellows here in the room and online. This is a community of 76 leaders from all over the United States. You have heard just a taste of the mosaic that this fellowship brings together. And I am awfully, y'all know this about me. I love you. You inspire me every day. And I know that no matter what happens a week from today, you are part of what will hold this thing together. And as we heard from Kody, yes, the boss will change, but the needs, the populations we serve, our communities will continue to look for leadership, and you all are right there on the front lines. I also want to extend my heartfelt thanks to our Aspen Comms and AGLN partners, Dar Vanderbeck, Olivia Cleaves, Anand Kitana, Sam Cherry, Ashley Cabrera, Charlotte Lewis, Ben Berliner, and where would we be without the amazing Lita Tremblay? Thank them all because they were all a part of this. Some are in the room today, some are online. As we leave today, let's continue these conversations, especially when they get tough. That's when we're most needed. Should our neighbors resort to anger or worse, danger? What should be our rules of engagement? Let's keep that question in mind. As fellows, we have special experience. We have special opportunities to lean in. And so let's be ready to serve. Please join the Civil Society Fellowship as we attempt to take these town halls on the road around the country. We've already heard some great ideas. We can talk about anything as long as we break bread. We can have prayer in whatever faith we have. And so I hope that y'all are ready to have some regional town halls. We've got fellows in Texas and Georgia who are already ready to step up to the plate. I think Florida's ready to get into the mix, and I hope my home state, California, will be right there as well as any community that is ready to engage. Thank you all for your participation today. For those in the room, we welcome you to a reception. Where's the reception? Right outside. Don't have to go far. And for those of you online, just thank you for holding that space with us today. We know that on election day, we'll all be doing our civic duty if we haven't already turned in our ballots, and we will stay in conversation. I close as I began with Rumi. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even the phrase each other doesn't make any sense. The breeze at dawn has secrets to tell you. Don't go back to sleep. You must ask for what you really want. Don't go back to sleep. People are going back and forth across the door sill where the two worlds touch. The door is round and open. Don't go back to sleep. Thank you.